Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into some incredibly intense and frankly fascinating allegations made by Kyle McLean Smith regarding the breakdown of two core societal safety nets, the family law system and the therapeutic community. We're going to be exploring some profound questions about justice, institutional power, and what actually happens when the very systems designed to heal and protect us seemingly turn against us. It's a really compelling look at where personal trauma meets systemic legal and sociological theory.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the accountability void, move into the divorce industrial complex and weaponized sanctuaries, pan out to look at the avoidance ecosystem, and finally wrap up with pathways to societal healing. Let's jump in.
Section 1. The accountability void and evading institutional responsibility.
So, Smith's overarching thesis here is that our society suffers from a massive, systemic failure to handle relationship breakdowns. And to illustrate just how absolute this evasion of accountability really is, he claims to have contacted 200 lawyers without finding representation. Just let that sink in for a second. 200. He basically describes himself as a modern legal outlaw, completely ostracized and forced into self-representation just to try and find justice. It's this stark portrait of a system where bad actors are allegedly shielded and vulnerable people are just left completely stranded.
Now, instead of looking at this as your standard messy family crisis, Smith actually reframes his situation as an organized attack. As this quote outlines, he's literally characterizing this ecosystem as functioning like organized crime, essentially preying on people right when they're at their absolute most vulnerable. Moving on to Section 2, the divorce industrial complex, and when family law becomes an industry. So what exactly is the divorce industrial complex? Well, Smith defines it as a systemic, profit-driven machine that is designed to extract capital rather than actually resolve conflict. And according to his accounts, the real-world impact is just staggering. To put that into perspective, he cites having to sell his condo for $10,000, taking a massive loss, literally just to try and communicate with his mother-in-law because he couldn't get a lawyer. It really highlights the devastating financial losses he claims to have endured just trying to navigate this bureaucracy. And how does this machine actually work? Smith argues that the mechanics of this complex specifically weaponize a lack of family support. Basically, if you don't have a safety net, you're an easy target. He alleges it completely disregards the severe psychological toll these proceedings take on a person, heavily penalizes anyone who falls outside standard socioeconomic norms, and, get this, operates as a form of state-scale domestic abuse. It acts as a mechanism for pure, unaccountable destruction that financially rewards tearing families apart. Think about what we normally expect from the law, right? Objective due process. But on the flip side, Smith describes the reality as a subjective house of mirrors designed to totally isolate victims. He argues the legal system is weaponized purely to facilitate asset liquidation and systemic coercion, tearing families apart while hiding behind highly precarious and chaotic legal rulings. Section 3. Weaponized sanctuaries in therapy and the illusion of healing.
Now, this is where things get really dark. On paper, therapeutic groups are exactly what you'd expect. Safe spaces built for spiritual growth and community recovery, but the transcripts allege a vastly different reality. Certain communities in Vancouver and Victoria are described not as sanctuaries, but as predatory ecosystems of grooming and coercion, actively preying on open, vulnerable individuals who are just looking for help.
To understand how this works, the source details a deeply chilling methodology of abuse involving a therapist named Misha. It goes like this. Step 1. Establish a false sense of safety at a retreat. Step 2. Extract what he calls quasi-consent in a group setting where social pressure makes it basically impossible to say no. And finally, use sensory overload, like a forced public musical performance, to inflict psychological harm that sticks with the victim like a parasite, deliberately exploiting their emotional openness.
This right here outlines a catastrophic failure of accountability across the board. Because these healing communities allegedly operate without any institutional guardrails, victims face a total lack of legal recourse. They're surrounded by a complicit network of enablers, and the abuse is just ignored by the government and police. And crucially, Smith claims the court system completely lacks the sophistication to even recognize this type of organized psychological grooming when it's disguised as spiritual practice.
That brings us to Section 4, the avoidance ecosystem and the reflex to ignore pain.
So, you're probably asking yourself, how does society let this happen? Well, the source points to a sociological concept termed the avoidance ecosystem. The theory suggests that because society literally struggles to look at deep human pain, it creates this toxic environment where we involuntarily disengage. Because it hurts too much for us to look at the raw, intense trauma of others, these underlying systemic injustices are easily allowed to thrive completely unchecked. This quote really hits the nail on the head. Our natural instinct to just escape uncomfortable truths is exactly what empowers these bad actors. The mind tries to protect itself, and in doing so, we collectively turn a blind eye, enabling the exact kind of leverage and control Smith claims to be surviving right now.
Finally, Section 5. Pathways to societal healing and reforming the systems.
Despite how grim this all sounds, Smith actually offers highly specific, constructive frameworks for how we might bridge the gap from personal trauma to systemic reform. He suggests pursuing charter challenges to demand real legal accountability. He proposes establishing witness and reconciliation commissions to force society to actively process this trauma. Crucially, he advocates for mandating that a neutral therapist be present in courtrooms to observe and mitigate psychological harm. And lastly, implementing a third-party proof-of-life mechanism so estranged parties can get basic, safe updates.
Which leads us to this bold assertion, distilling his entire thesis into one sentence. Smith firmly believes that family law, and specifically the way the state handles the dissolution of families, is the absolute root cause of our broader societal dysfunction. Basically, until we actually address this institutionalized, compounding trauma, everything else we try to fix in society is going to be an uphill battle.
I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on today. We place immense trust in our institutions and our healers. But when those systems fail, and when they actively operate without guardrails to financially reward destruction rather than healing, who is left to protect the vulnerable? It really asks you to reconsider that trust and recognize that ultimately demanding radical personal and systemic accountability might just fall to us.